In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to write a walking bass line. In a previous video, I showed how to write bass parts. It's up here. In that video, I stressed repeatedly that you don't want to write out a walking bass line on a bass part. You want to use chords and slashes and give the notation walk. Well, there's a lot of reasons why you would want to write a walking bass part. So the first one, perhaps, is that you're writing for an educational level ensemble, a middle school band, a beginning/intermediate, maybe high school level ensemble. Maybe you're writing for a professional group, but you know that the bass player comes from the symphony orchestra and maybe can't improvise a walking bass part the way that a jazz player would be able to confidently. So there are lots of good reasons to write a walking bass part. Also, if you want to add a bass line when you're producing a demo, like a synthesized in-the-box demo to show to a client for a commission, you would want to write out the walking bass line for that too. So this video is going to show you how I do that. But before we get into it, hit subscribe. Smash the like button. That thumbs up thing is important for algorithm reasons. And head on over to Patreon and think about pledging a few dollars each month. It goes a long way toward helping me produce content like this. And there's going to be materials for this lesson. You're going to be able to recreate everything that I do with an audio track and the part and everything, so you can recreate everything that we do and work alongside me. Before we get to actually writing a bass line, let me give you 5 important rules to writing a walking bass part in your jazz ensemble chart. Number 1, and this might seem a little bit obvious, but fill each measure with quarter notes. That's the sound of a walking bass part. The thum ba thum 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 thum. It's quarter notes. You want to hear quarter notes? Write quarter notes. Number 2. Put the root of each chord at the beginning of each chord. So if it says C major, put a C on beat 1. Number 3, if a chord lasts for more than one measure, you can start the subsequent measure with the 5th of that chord. So for example, if the chord is C major, you can start the second bar of C with a G in the bass line. Number 4, connect these notes as smoothly as possible using either diatonic or chromatic movement, usually in combination, honestly. So for example, if the chord says G6, that's a type of G major, and you're going to use the G major scale for your diatonic movement. If the chord says D minor 7, you're going to use a D minor scale, usually Dorian, as your diatonic movement. Chromatic means half steps. Then number 5, keep the bass in its money range, meaning more or less in the bass clef staff. So the lowest note of a 4-string bass, a 4-string electric bass, and a 4-string upright bass is an E below bass clef. Now I know that basses with extra strings can oftentimes go lower than that, but you don't know what the bass player is going to have. And honestly, if it's a bass player who needs to see their part written out, they probably don't have one of those extended basses. And if you have a bass player who does have a 5-string bass, they probably don't want to see your janky bass line written out. E is the lowest note on bass. It's open E string. Bass, by the way, can go way above the bass clef staff, but the higher that you go, the less like a bass that it sounds. So while a bass playing really, really high is a great sound, and you should use it, for the sake of walking bass, let's keep bass in the lower part of its range. All right, so to get into it, we're going to look at the soli at the beginning of my arrangement of Lady Be Good, which is in a swing style. So we looked at it on my previous lesson about writing bass parts, and the bass part as is a bunch of chords and slashes. So the first thing we're going to do is actually fill in the first beat of each chord. If the chord lasts for more than one measure, we're going to put the 5th of that chord on the beginning of the second measure of that chord change. So for instance, it starts on the soli starts on a G6. We're going to write a G on beat 1. Then the next bar is C. We're going to put a C there, etc., etc. So let's fill it out. Then I go back and fill in the missing notes. And I try to keep it diatonic or chromatic. Now, if that's not possible, You can arpeggiate the chord as well, but don't do too much arpeggiation because then it won't sound like an actual walking bass part. It'll sound like a, boogie woogie left hand part or something like that. That is a good sound, but it's not the sound of jazz walking bass. Notice at some parts where diatonic movement isn't possible, I'll move chromatically to the next pitch. All right, now that I've written enough of this out, I'm going to export a MIDI file from Sibelius and bring it into Logic. And I actually have a mix of Lady Be Good with the bass part removed, with an excellent bass part recorded by Brian Ward, much better than this one that I just composed. I've removed and I'm going to replace it with MIDI bass so that you can hear what we just wrote. I don't know about you, that sounds pretty darn convincing to me. So that's how walking bass is written, and that's how I do it when I have to create demos, or oftentimes I'll fill in a walking bass part during my compositional process just to kind of hear the chord changes and the MIDI playback. Think about heading over to Patreon and definitely hit that subscribe button. It helps me so much. All right, with that, I'll catch you next time. Goodbye.